Everybody has an opinion about money games, but what about the amount of money that HBCUs are seeing from said games? We have a list of all of the payouts that we know thus far, and three in particular have caught my eye. Oh, yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off doesn't mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com/locked on to make every moment more. And if you're new to FanDuel, you get $150 back in bonus bets when you put down a $5 bet, win or lose. Variety of topics that we're hitting today. We'll look at the Grambling versus UAPB game. We'll look at the Jackson State versus FAMU game and how those two matchups set the scene for the Invesco QQQ Classic between Jackson State and Grambling on Saturday. Prior to that, Delaware State needs to prove it. Their men's basketball team is entering a very important stretch, a 2-game stretch. They're in the midst of a 4-game stretch, and they need to prove it over these next 2 weeks. But prior to that, let's get a little bit of football talk, because I'm telling you right now, any opportunity that I get to talk a little bit of football, I'm taking the opportunity, and this is something that interested me. Everybody has an opinion about money games. I said that in the opening, but let's take that aside. Take your opinion of said money games out for a second, and let's look at the amount of money that HBCUs are seeing in these games. Now, if your issue is with money, come on, we right here, we cooking. But if your issue is with the games existing themselves, let's separate that for one day, please. Let's look at the amount of money. And Mo Carter hit me, right? Friend of the show out there at Fox 54 in Alabama. He hit me last night to tell me about this. And he was like, hey, these are just some of the figures that I'm seeing. I'm going to put something out there about it. So I knew this was coming up. And I was like, you know what? Let's talk about it on the show as well, now that he has tweeted them out. And he gets them from Sam Herder, who has collected a bunch of FBS versus FCS payouts. For those who maybe aren't aware, a money game is a game that an FCS team plays against an FBS team, in which the FCS team is paid to come and play that game. So that's why it's called a money game. And typically you're at a heavy disadvantage and you are a heavy underdog. But let's look at the HBCU teams that have had their amount announced thus far. FAMU at Miami, $700,000. Alabama A&M at Auburn, $525,000. Morgan State at Ohio, $425,000. Jackson State versus University of Louisiana at Monroe, $350,000. Norfolk State at East Carolina, $350,000. South Carolina State at Georgia Southern, $337,000 and $500. That's not one of the ones that I'm going to highlight, but that was a very specific number. $337,500. Odd number, but I'll leave it alone. Now for the last two, you have North Carolina A&T at Wake Forest and Bethune-Cookman at Western Michigan, both getting paid out $325,000. I'll start top to bottom, right? I'll start with the one that caught my eye first and work into the one that was kind of last to catch my eye. FAMU versus Miami. They getting a bag. Like when I say a bag, I mean FAMU is getting nearly $750,000, right? You're looking at $700,000 for the Rattlers to travel from the top of the state to the bottom of the state, to go from Tallahassee to Miami. This is amazing. Like I'll be honest with you, for all of the ones that we know, this is clearly the highest HBCU figure by over $100,000, nearly 200,000. But this is also of all the FBS, FCS games that we know at this point. So the top of February, for all the ones we know entering the second month, entering Black History Month. Happy Black History Month to you. I should have said that at the top of the show. This is the highest payout that any FCS team is receiving in 2024. They are tied with one other game at 700,000, but nobody has more than FAMU, or nobody is receiving more than FAMU is at this current time. Maybe the figures for another game come out and they top that, but as of right now, FAMU is getting a big bag. But the other one that caught my eye is not so positive. This one is actually quite negative, and it was more of a head scratcher. When you go through all of these people who are playing HBCUs, not the HBCUs who are playing, but the ones who are playing the HBCUs, you see big schools, you see medium-sized schools. Obviously, the HBCUs are the small schools, but you see big and medium-sized schools. So when I seen North Carolina A&T at Wake Forest near the bottom of the payout list, I scratched my head because I looked above them and I saw Georgia Southern. I saw East Carolina. I saw University of Louisiana Monroe, and I saw Ohio. I saw 1, 2, 3, 4 teams that are not Power 5 schools. And that was a bit of a head scratcher. I do not know the business side of every single one of these schools. I don't know what their finances are like. All I can say is that from my POV, from my vantage point, I saw a Power 5 ACC school paying out less money than these Group of 5 schools. And it made me have to go to the website to see what else can I compare this to. And when I look at all the other P5 schools, they're 350 or higher. And that's why I think North Carolina A&T got the short end of the stick here. This one caught my eye because I look and I say, this doesn't fit. Western Michigan, these schools don't have the name recognition for me that Wake Forest has. Wake Forest, I know what conference they're in without having to look it up. So I know the Wake Forest mascot. They're the Demon Deacons. Like when you're looking at, I don't know all of these people's mascots. So they have enough name recognition, enough brand recognition to where I think they should have been higher. And when I look at all of the other FBS teams who are in the Power 5, they are the lowest. When I look at all the other FBS teams that are in the Power 5, I got to go to UCF, University of Central Florida. They just got in the Big 12. And they're at, let's see, what number is UCF at? UCF is at 325? No, excuse me. 350. I thought I had this in my notes. I don't have it right here, but they were higher than 325, right? I think they were in the 350 range. But then you look at the other ones, and you look at a Tulsa, you look at a Texas Tech, you look at a Kansas, and they're between 360 and 375. Yes, there you go. UCF is at 350, and they just made it to the Big 12. I just thought it was a bit odd that they're $25,000 less than the next Power 5 school. That caught my eye in a negative way, right? So I'll keep it at that. I thought A&T was a bit short. And now for the third game that caught my eye, and this is in a positive way, is kind of the inverse of that. Morgan State at Ohio. This is not Ohio State. This is Ohio, right? This is a MAC team. This is a Mid-Atlantic Conference team. I believe that's what the MAC stands for. Either way, it's not Power 5. It's not Power 5. And they're paying out $425,000. $425K. By comparison to everyone else, they're tied with some, but this is more than any other Group of 5 school. There's some Group of 5 schools that also pay out $425, but there's not a Group of 5 school that pays out $426 or more. Now, I threw a lot of numbers out there, right? We threw out a lot of numbers. I like the Jackson State versus ULM just matchup because I felt like last time we seen Jackson State in one of these type games, they nearly got them. And it's been since 2018 since we've had an HBCU knock off an FBS team. So that's not even about the figures. That's about the competition. So I guess I kind of opened the door for people to talk about how they feel about this because I did that. But overall, I threw a lot of numbers. But I'm looking at FAMU getting 700K. Thumbs up. I'm looking at Bethune-Cookman getting the same amount as North Carolina A&T despite facing a group of 5 team. That's a thumbs down for A&T. That's a thumbs down for A&T. Then I'm looking at Morgan State going against Ohio, and they have the 3rd largest payout that we know thus far. That's another really big thumbs up. I want all of these HBCUs to get your bread. We'll talk about money games towards the beginning of August, right before the school year starts and before the season starts. But as of right now, FAMU, Morgan State, and North Carolina A&T have the 3 figures that caught my eye the most. Now, I have a big statement that I want to pass out, and it's directed at Delaware State. It's time to prove it. It's now or never. We'll explore why I say this as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Go to FanDuel.com/Locked On to make every moment more. And if you're new to FanDuel, maybe I've been talking about it for so long, and you said, you know what? Today is the day that I listen to the mouth of the South. And you go to FanDuel, you download the app. Go ahead and you'll be new to FanDuel. You get $150 back in bonus bets, win or lose on your first bet. So that means if you put some money down on the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl and they end up losing to the San Francisco 49ers, you still get $150 back. You go ahead and pick the Chiefs to win, and they do win the Super Bowl, and the GOAT in training gets his 3rd, and you'll get whatever you won and $150 back in bonus bets. It's really that simple. NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB when it comes back, college basketball, any and everything in between. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com/Locked On, and you'll make every moment more. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports today because it is a first of its kind 24/7 sports network on YouTube. No matter what time of the day it is, you can check something out as long as you subscribe to Locked On Sports today. Now, I have a message that I want to send to Delaware State. This is directly aimed at the Hornets. It's time for you to prove it. I'm talking to your men's basketball team. You need to prove it because there are questions that are rightfully forming about how much of a quality team that you are. Are you in that upper echelon of the MEAC? And over the next 2 weeks, you have a firm chance to say either, actually, I don't know if you can say yes, but you can for sure say no. I don't know if Delaware State can prove that they're in the upper echelon of the MEAC, but they can for sure prove that they aren't. So this is an opportunity for you to prove that. You still have something to show. So I think that if you can split the next 2 games, you will be able to manage and kind of hold a little bit of respect. I understand respect don't mean nothing, this, that, and the third, but I don't care. When it comes down to it, I want to be looked at as a good team because when you're looked at as a good team, 9 times out of 10, you actually are. This can't be 10. Because a couple of weeks, maybe even just a week ago, to be honest, there was a moment where they were at the top of the conference. They were undefeated, the last undefeated team. And I came on here and I spoke about them. But when I spoke about them, I didn't call them a top team in the conference. I didn't crown them, right? This is no Denny Green. If you want to crown them, then crown them. I didn't do that. What I did was say that they're undefeated, and I said they're the last undefeated team in the conference. I chose those words very carefully because that was a fact. Where they place within the conference is a little bit of an opinion, right? And especially knowing that they hadn't played anybody. And when I said it, I said this. It is not a slight to them, and I stand true to that. You only play who's on your schedule. They can't choose the fact that they started off with Coppin State, Maryland Eastern Shore, Morgan State. They can't control that. They can't control what type of teams they were going to be in 2023/2024. They couldn't choose that. So when you knock off the three bottom feeders as far as records, the three last teams in the conference, I'm not going to slight you because you're just doing your job. I would get on you if you didn't beat those teams. But I can't come here and champion you when you haven't played a North Carolina Central, when you haven't played a Norfolk State, right? And now you would even say that South Carolina State is kind of making an argument that you should bring their name into it when you haven't faced a Howard. So I said this. They're going to go on a stretch when they have to face these other teams. There are 8 teams in the MEAC. By Monday, they'll face all the 7 they could because they're the 8th team. By Monday, Delaware State will face every single team in the MEAC. And if on Monday night, it turns out that they've beaten the 3 teams with the worst record in the conference, and they've lost to the other 4 teams with the best record in the conference, guess what? They belong with the 3 they beat, but not the 4 they lost to. This is what I mean when I say that they're in a prove-it stretch. So far, they played South Carolina State and they played North Carolina Central, and they lost in both of those games. I don't care what it looked like when they were winning. I don't care what it looked like when they were losing. They have beaten teams that are not beating many other teams, and they've lost to the teams that are beating other teams. So they're no longer the last remaining undefeated team in the conference. Instead, they're not even top 2. Now the attention is on the 2 teams that we already thought it was. Here's the other part of it. If they go in on a 4-game losing streak, how much do we praise South Carolina State for knocking off them? I don't know. I still want to, it's kind of like the argument in college football. Well, this team was top 10 when you played them, but they end up being garbage. So is it an impressive win? Most times we give them credit for it. So I'll give South Carolina State credit nonetheless. What you just saw was me go through my thought process live on the screen with you. Lost to South Carolina State, lost to North Carolina Central, to be determined on Norfolk State, to be determined on Howard. Now, I will say this. If you beat Norfolk State, you will get respect. If you lose to Norfolk State and then beat Howard, I don't know. It's up in the air. But if you beat Norfolk State, you're definitely going to get your respect. But you cannot lose to both of them. If they come in and they lose to both of them, Wednesday is going to be an ugly conversation. I'm just telling you right now, we will revisit Delaware State's 4-game stretch on Wednesday's episode. I don't know what it'll look like because I don't know what these next 2 games the outcome will be. But we will look at this 4-game stretch in total. I've said it before. I record too early on Mondays for it to be on Tuesday's episode. But I will record on Tuesday for Wednesday's episode. Trust and believe that. Delaware State men's basketball. Are you one of the better teams in the conference? That's a question that will be answered over the next 2 games on Saturday and Monday. Are you able to beat either Norfolk State or Howard? That's how you answer that question in an affirmative fashion. Now, as we move forward, there's 2 other teams that are, I wouldn't say struggling, but they're trying to get their groove back. And they'll do it against each other on Saturday. But let's look at how Grambling and Jackson State got to this before they get into the Invesco QQQ Classic. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. I want to look at this Jackson State versus Grambling State game, but I also want to look at how we got here because the SWAC is tightly contested, which makes the outcome of the last 2 games these 2 games that we're about to look at very important. But then it also makes the outcome of the game that we'll briefly preview equally important. This is crazy. Monday was a great day for the SWAC. If you just enjoy basketball, like if you don't have any dog in the race, if you're not rooting for anybody, or if your team won, this is a great day to just enjoy basketball because there was a couple of really big time matchups and big time games. And you look at Grambling versus UAPB. You look at Jackson State versus FAMU. There's another game that we'll look at tomorrow in Texas Southern versus Alabama State that was decided by just a point. But for right now, we'll handle two at a time. Grambling fell to UAPB in a major fashion. It was ugly. It wasn't close. It wasn't competitive. Grambling was dominated in this game. We looked at UAPB's women's basketball team and how they suffocated Grambling with defense. But then you look at this other game over here, and it was ugly. It was ugly. I was able to credit Grambling's defense on the women's side. This right here, though, was an absolute beatdown. Grambling's best moment, as far as it being competitive, was the beginning of the game when they made the first shot on their first possession, or when they made the first bucket on their first possession, right? They got a rebound, they got a layup. Those 2 minutes when it was 2-0, that was the only time that Grambling led. Those 2 minutes when it was 2-0 is the only time that the game was tied for Grambling, right? So after UAPB made a 3-pointer to take a 1-point lead, they never let that lead go. They slowly but surely stretched the lead out into a double-digit lead. After it reached double digits, it never went back to single digits. They stretched that lead up to 20. It did fluctuate from there. Between 15 and 20 points for the majority of the game. I think you have 14 here, 22 there. But for the most part, it was a 15 to 20 point lead for the entirety of the last 37-ish minutes, 35-ish minutes. UAPB dominated Grambling. So it's the way that they lost. But for Jackson State, it's just the fact that they lost. It's not about how it looked because you lost by 2 points to FAMU. That was a very tightly contested game. The problem is it's your second loss in a row. The problem is it's your third loss in 4 games. That's the problem. With Grambling, it's the fact that you got smacked around. With Jackson State, it's the fact that you're just losing. It's the fact that not that long ago, you were sitting there at the top of the conference. It's the fact that you felt great about your team, and then when you lose this type of, this many games in a short period of time, then you start questioning what's going on. So that's the difference between these situations. But at the same time, you look at the SWAC. Take these two teams as individuals away and look at them as the conglomerate that is the SWAC, because the SWAC is always hotly contested. Grambling is 5-3, which has them tied for first place between first and third. Grambling is 5-2, which puts them between first and third, a tie. Then you have TSU, who is 5-3 and alone at fourth place. But then you have Jackson State, who is tied with 3 other teams between 5th and 8th place as 4-3 teams. This is the mass separation. I just told you that 1 through 8 is separated by 1 game. Grambling's at 5-3. Jackson State's at 4 and I keep messing this up. Jackson State is at 4-3. Grambling is at 5-2. It's a very small margin of difference. But you're looking at Jackson State. If you just go Peak versus Valley, Jackson State is first place. Jackson State, Grambling is first place. Well, I keep want to confuse them and mix them up so badly. That's on me. I'm sorry. Rewind. Grambling State is 5-2. They are tied between first and third place. Texas Southern is 4th by themselves at a record of 5-3. Then you have the rest of the teams who are between 5th and 8th at a 4-3 record. That's where Jackson State lands. So you have Grambling, who is 5-2, and if you just go Peak and Valley, first place for Grambling, 8th place for Jackson State. And this huge gap is actually only separated by 1 game. So what is a 7-place margin or difference is a 1-game difference. This is a huge matchup, and it's not just the fact that it'll be on TNT. It's not just the fact that it's the Invesco QQQ Classic. And I hope that I'm getting this. Well, I know I'm getting this right, but I keep trying to say it slow because last year I kept calling it the wrong thing. I won't say what I called it because I know I'm going to snap back to and just relapse to saying it wrong. But this is a major game with major ramifications between two teams that I still think are very good teams. Jackson State just lost a couple in a row, 3 out of the last 4, and Grambling just got smacked around by UAPB. Things ain't looking pretty for them, but at the end of Saturday, one of them will come up victorious, and we'll look at that on Monday's episode unless something else just absolutely bonkers happens over the weekend. So I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. We'll be back tomorrow to look at Rodney Hill flipping back to FAMU. We touched on that briefly yesterday, but I want to actually hone in a little bit more on that as we open up Friday's episode, the last day of the week. So enjoy your Black History Month. Do whatever you want to do to celebrate it for you. If you aren't Black, celebrate somebody who is Black. If you are Black, be celebrated. Much love to you. In the meantime, in between time, if you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.